Overwatch's brand new game mode Stadium came out a few weeks ago, and I've been really enjoying it. For a lot of people, it's been a massive renaissance for the Overwatch community, where it feels like the game is genuinely in a better state than maybe it's ever been before. And yet, I haven't really made a whole lot of content, and honestly, a lot of the reason for that is because similar to Perk's release being so big and so amazing, I kinda didn't know where to start. Stadium has been much of the same. I'm just such a professional over-analyzer who could already make a 40-minute video on an extremely minor mechanic, and then they dump all this on me. I mean, hell, of course I want to talk about all of it, but in my head I'll think, oh, I could bang it out in an hour, and then I'll record it and it will be 5 hours. So I decided, let's start small. In this video, I will be making a little tier list to rank how effective every single survival item you can get in the game is, excluding character-specific ones. I want this video to be as generally applicable to as many characters as possible, and also I have a tendency to ramble, so the less items the better. Besides, a lot of the character-specific items obviously have a lot more attention drawn to them, so you already know a lot about them. Whereas a lot of these generic items, despite being on every character, ironically, they're easier to gloss over and miss things with because of the fact that they're generic and anyone can use them. So it feels more worthwhile to talk about them. We're just doing survival items in this video to keep the scope small, but later I may move on to ability and weapon items. Lastly, I just want to say this is a little bit of a tough one, because there are a lot of items which I consider to be extremely useful in their niche, it's just their niche is extremely tiny. So do I say they're bad, or do I say they're actually really good, you just have to know how to use them? In the end, I decided that I would still say they are bad, even if I think they can be really good in the right context, if I think that context is very narrow. I will say when I think an item can be much better than I'm ranking it if you use it in the right situation, but in fairness, I think they've done a generally pretty good job of making a very well-balanced set of items, where every item has a use case. So I feel like the bottom 3 tiers would basically just be empty if I gave the excuse of, oh, but it's really good in this situation, even if it's terrible 90% of the time. With all that said, let's jump straight in. Kicking things off with the very first survival item, we have Adrenaline Shot, which grants you 10 extra health and makes it so that when you obtain a health pack, you get a 20% move speed boost for 5 seconds, as well as 50 over health. Now in the common item section, half of these items cost 1,000 credits and half of them cost 1,500. This one is obviously one of the 1,000 cost ones. I'm going to be pretty direct with you right away. Almost every 1,000 cost survival item really sucks, even considering that they are cheap. Which is to say, I think this item is our very first F tier. It is tied for many other items as the cheapest way to obtain more health while buying an item, but the cost efficiency is terrible. The 1,500 cost items will all grant you 25 health plus an extra bonus, whereas here you're only paying 33% less to get less than half the amount of health with a much less useful bonus. In terms of cost efficiency, it's just really bad spending. In terms of the effect itself, I must admit, I initially had higher hopes for this. Early on into Stadium, I had a feeling this item would be awkward to use, situational, but in the right situation, it could be really good, right? I mean, picking up a health pack and getting an extra 50 over health, as well as movement speed, if you're the kind of character that's good at camping a health pack and being really awkward to take out, maybe it's actually a pretty good item to take. But after having tried this item a couple times, I've found that it is very underwhelming. The main issue is that Stadium specifically, you have a lot more just massive death ball team fights on point, and there doesn't tend to be many health packs near point. I've just noticed generally a lot of the fights in Stadium don't happen near health packs, and yeah, it's possible to use some mobility to go grab a health pack and then come back into the fight, but you're probably going back into the fight with no cooldowns then, which probably wasn't worth it just to get 50 over health and a slight movement speed bonus. So yeah, this item is basically useless aside from the situation where you only have 1,000 credits and you want more health and you know it's not cost efficient, but like the alternative is no bonus health. Other than that, I would never take this item. Next up is an item that does something pretty straightforward but pretty weird. Electrolytes is a 1,000 cost survival item that will simply give you 100 over health. That never comes back, not even when you respawn. It's literally just, you get an extra 100 health for the first team fight. That's it. So you might hear that and be like, wow, that sucks. I would rather invest in permanent health that actually helps me throughout the entire game rather than one single fight. But you gotta remember that Overwatch is definitely a game where you get a lot of momentum. If you're able to take more angles than the opponent because you win the first team fight, it permanently puts your opponent in a really tough spot for the rest of the game. I'm not about to say this ability is good, I'm putting it in E tier, but it does just barely dodge F tier because I think it has one very small niche. I think this is actually not a bad item to take if you're a flanker on round 1. On the first round, when people haven't got much and they're basically playing normal Overwatch, if you're trying to play a flanker, trying to deal with the enemy hit scans, and you have to go dive their backline alone, having an extra 100 HP in a duel is actually a pretty big deal. And again, it's only for one fight, but if you do a good enough job of being greedy and taking loads of angles from the enemies and get good map control, that could be all you need to win the entire game. Not to mention the rounds are very short, so a temporary benefit rather than a permanent one might not be as bad as it sounds. Again, generally I still wouldn't recommend this item in most circumstances, but I think it could be a decent item to take in the very first round, not only for the reasons I've just mentioned, but also because in fairness, it is a 1000 cost survival item that gives you more than just 10 HP. You know, again, it's because it's temporary HP, but considering you're only given 3,500 credits for the first round, you can't double invest in survivability unless you want to have absolutely no items to improve your damage, which is usually not advisable. Whereas with Electrolytes, you can invest in survivability and still have credits left over for damage. So I'd say it just barely dodges F tier. It's an extremely niche pick, but in the right situation, it can actually be pretty impactful. In fact, having played even more with Electrolytes since this initial recording, I'm now convinced it's not just E tier, I would bump it up to a high D, almost pushing C. This item is extremely valuable for such a cheap item on a select few characters. I already mentioned I think it's best on flankers typically, but I think it's important to stress the reason why this isn't higher. This is genuinely like a B or A tier item on the right characters, but the problem is it's rather narrow. I would say that Genji is the only character that gets insane value out of this item, and Moira is a close second. Other than Genji and Moira though, a lot of the other flankers just don't get a lot out of it because there's not a lot of options, and a lot of them are tankier flankers like Reaper or D.Va, who by virtue of having more health in the case of D.Va and more lifesteal in the case of Reaper, don't really get as much out of having overhealth. But I think a big thing that made me change my mind on this item is my initial recording. I'd only had one chance to use this item with Genji specifically, and it felt okay, but it didn't feel like it made a difference. However, since then, I have had more opportunities to use Electrolytes with Genji specifically, and sure enough, it has felt a lot better, and I think that first game might have just been an unfortunate fluke, as I've had multiple games where I know that the single sole reason we have won the first or second round is because we won the first team fight because I took Electrolytes. As well as that, this isn't really new information, but it's just something I forgot to say in the initial recording that I was wanting to say that I think is one of the best ways I could explain the value of this item to you if you're struggling to understand. Have you ever gone into a round 1 and before the team fight even just starts, just something dumb happens and someone gets picked? Maybe it's support, maybe it's a DPS, it doesn't really matter. But before you even get to the point, maybe someone gets headshot and their head gets blown off when they didn't even know someone was looking at them. Maybe Ryan goes for the stupidest pin of all time, but someone just so happens to waltz into it without knowing and dies. Doesn't really matter what happens. You go into a team fight and someone gets picked immediately, and so you're 4v5 from the beginning. Have you ever then realized that, wow, we just never had a chance to recover from that from step 1? Like, the second that one guy got picked by that one bullshit thing that happened, whatever it might be, we have not been able to claw this game back. Whether it be because you're constantly staggered, whether it be because it provokes your teammates to start arguing with each other, whatever it may be, or if it's just people losing the mental game, it's like, oh, we lost first team fight, guess I'll give up. For whatever reason, I'm sure you understand, it's really, really common that one stupid mistake, especially in these much shorter stadium games, causes a cascade of people arguing with each other, people getting demoralized, people not regrouping, and people not being able to fight on point. I have seen it many times before. There are many times I am in a game and I'm like, I know full well we have a competent team, theoretically speaking, but because one guy who's not even that bad, but he just got unlucky and got his head blown off by a widow, so we lost the first team fight because we were 4v5, and then everyone just decides to start blaming each other. That sometimes literally is the end right there. So what does this have to do with electrolytes? Electrolytes is a tool that you can use to basically enable you to inflict that pain onto the enemy team. I mean, if you are a support and you get dove by a Genji that has an extra 100 health more than usual, you are at a severe disadvantage. You are most of the time going to die there unless you escape the Genji or the Genji dies, which is going to be a pretty tough one to do. And so if you can get a pick on the enemy team practically for free by taking electrolytes before the first team fight even properly starts, you inflict that pain on them. You cause that cascade of, now they lose the first team fight, which means they lose a ton of space, which means they all start arguing with each other, which means now they're not playing coordinated, and then they start coming in staggered, and etc, etc, etc. I guess it's just important to understand that this is only a very greedy short-term investment that doesn't make sense if you don't use it to create a permanent advantage. It's a trap to think this doesn't grant you any permanent value, it's just you have to use it in a way in which it does. Or to translate this into the language of Bloons Tower Defense 6, which I think much more people will be able to understand. Taking electrolytes is like taking more starting cash. Sure, it's greedy and upfront, but if you use that extra starting cash to buy an extra banana farm earlier than you would have been able to otherwise, then you can convert that temporary boost into a permanent advantage. I'm sure we all understand clearly now. Incidentally, in this case, space are the banana farms. Having angles is having a banana farm. Now please go apply this knowledge to your actual games of Overwatch, unironically. Next up is Field Rations, another 1000 cost survival item that gives you one simple ability. While you are standing on point, you regenerate 8 HP a second for existing. And this one is the only 1000 cost survival item that is decent without needing a very specific situation. For that reason, it gets C tier. Don't get me wrong, it's only 8 HP a second. It's not gonna blow your socks off, it's not really that impressive. However, it is very, very cheap. There is a lot of just stacking on point in this mode, so it's going to get a lot of use. And importantly, as we'll be mentioning a lot in future in this video, it is an ability that gets better with damage reduction. If it takes more than 25 damage, let's say, to cut through 25 HP because of the fact that the character you're shooting has damage resistance, that means that every point of HP you heal is worth more than it was before. I'm bringing this up because essentially that's the main way you make this item useful. In fairness, if you are just playing regularly and you have a character with no armor, no damage reduction, no special items or gimmicks, and you just pick this item and fight on point, it's not exactly useless, but it might not be the best pick. However, if you have any form of damage reduction, then this item becomes a whole lot more useful because, well, let's say you're using Fortify as Orisa combined with your armor's natural damage reduction, that could hit you to the cap of 50% damage reduction. And if you're taking damage at half the speed that you should be doing, that means that rather than getting 8 health per second, you're more getting like 16 health per second, which is no joke. I mean, again, 16 still might not sound like a lot, but you've got to remember that if you took one of the other items, you would have just gotten 10 extra health. And don't get me wrong, that would have increased the size of your health bar, but you get more than 10 extra health just for existing on point for less than a second as someone with damage resistance with this item. As a result, it's a lot more valuable than the other ones. Again, still very small numbers, so that's why it's only C tier, but with the right build, you can actually get quite a lot of value for this considering how cheap it is. And finally, for the 1000 cost survival items, we have Running Shoes, which just goes into F tier. I'm not even going to bury the lead. Running Shoes is another item that will give you 10 health for 1000, so once again, at the very least it does give you health, but I've already mentioned that it's a terrible conversion rate between credits to health, and as a result, it's a pretty desperate thing to buy just for the health. But maybe you're buying it for the ability, so what's that? The ability is that when you leave the spawn room, you temporarily get a 20% speed boost. I initially thought I might go a little higher than F with this one, I might go E or even D if I was really feeling like it, because of the fact that it's nice to have this sometimes on Mercy or Kirikau. A lot of the times people do not walk back so that you can TP to them or Guardian Angel to them, and it's nice to just be able to run even just a little bit faster than your teammates so that you can actually get over to them so you can TP or Guardian Angel. As well as that, in theory, if you get into really long stally fights on point and you keep dying as a support and you need to get back into the fight ASAP, then having this could be a big difference maker. But I'm going to be real with you, the main reason why I moved this to F was that I started to realize not only is the impact of the ability of this item pretty minor, but it only helps you if you're dying repeatedly. Like, this is not worth it if you aren't dying that much. And if you are dying a whole lot, don't get me wrong, maybe then you get a bit more use out of it, but you would probably rather take an item that, I don't know, would help you stop dying. Now, in fairness, I did just say that 1000 credit survival items suck and it's slim pickings. So, arguably, you can't pick an item if you do only have exactly 1000 credits and you can't even afford 500 more. There's not much you could pick to live. But even then, I would often argue you could probably do more to prevent these disastrous situations where you have no space and you're getting trampled if you played a bit more aggressively, if you instead invested that money into weapon power or attack speed or hell, maybe even weapon lifesteal. The best use I can think of it is running a Kiriko with Tuzu and basically accepting I'm going to TP onto point, double Suzu my tank, die on point, and then run back out of spawn and TP to point, double Suzu my tank, die on point, and run back in there. And don't get me wrong, there might be some desperate situations where your tank is hard carrying and everyone else is throwing, where that's unironically a good play, but like, let's be real. Generally speaking, that's not exactly a great strategy. So yeah, I don't think running shoes are very good. F tier. Next up, we have the 3 1500 cost common survival items, and I'm doing them all in a bunch because they are all very similar. All 3 of these are items where you get 25 extra health plus a benefit. As a result, they're all pretty neck and neck in effectiveness, and they're all going in B tier. That being said, I do have my favorites. The weakest one on average, but not the weakest one all the time, is Siphon Gloves, the one that only gives you 25 normal extra health, and the benefit you get is that you heal 25 health whenever you land a melee attack. This is the best one to take on any character that's going to be hitting people with their melees very often. It's just there's not a lot of characters that fit that description. I think it's great to take on Genji, I think it's great to take on Reinhardt because his hammer does count. In fact, Reinhardt probably gets more use out of this item than anyone else in the game. But then other than that, it's like, well, who else would you take it on? Maybe Moira? Maybe Lucio? Maybe Reaper at a real stretch? You're not really taking it on many other characters other than Genji or Reinhardt. And for any other character, it's just straight up worse than the other 2 options. Next up is probably the one that most people think is the best of the 3, but I personally think it falls in the middle. That being Armoured Vest. Most straightforward one perhaps, because it's literally just 25 extra armor. Now for those of you who are a bit out of the loop, the way that armor works currently is every single time you take an instance of damage that doesn't pierce armor, you take 7 less damage than you were supposed to. Only whatever damage you take, it can't reduce it by more than 50%, just as a safeguard so we don't have Tracer not even able to damage armor because she only does 6 damage per bullet and it negates 7. What would actually happen is she'd do 3 damage per bullet because it can't do more than half the damage. Ever since armor got massively buffed in Season 11, armor has been a much bigger deal in Overwatch than arguably ever before. Against a good like 2/3 of the roster, armor health effectively is almost always capped at its maximum damage reduction of 50%, meaning that every point of armor health you have is worth 2 points of normal health a lot of the time. Arguably even more because of the fact that it heals at the same speed despite being worth double. I say this just to make it clear when you want armor. Armor is good to either counter things that spray you with lots of little hits, or it's good if you're the kind of character that gets a lot of healing and pocket because of the fact that all the heals you get will just straight up be worth more if you have armor. If you're facing someone like a Cass or an Ashe, taking this item is essentially getting 32 extra HP, which isn't bad, but isn't amazing either. However, if you're fighting a character like Reaper, it's more like 50 extra HP, which is a very good deal. For that reason, it's pretty understandable why this seems to be the most popular one, but one of the main reasons why it's not my favorite of the 3 is because the last one I think is particularly good for supports, when I already think supports are the main characters that should be thinking about these items. The last one grants you 25 extra shield HP and reduces your health regeneration delay by 33%. Unfortunately, I did test this out and it appears to not help with shield health. If you weren't aware, shield health has a separate timer for health regeneration from your normal health regeneration, and I was hoping that it would do a 33% reduction to both, but no, it only makes your normal health regenerate faster, not your shield health, which is a shame. Either way, why do I think getting 25 extra shield health is better? Is it because shields are more valuable than armor? No, I think armor is definitely the most valuable health type in the game, and it's not even close. But I really do think that 33% reduction to the time you have to wait before your health regen kicks in matters a lot on support. You see, for normal characters it's a 5-second wait, but for support with their roll passive it's a 2.5-second wait. That's before the 33% reduction, which would knock it down to just barely over a second and a half of wait time. That's pretty quick. I mean, just for frame of reference, I believe ever since it's been introduced it hasn't been changed. Shield health, including back in Overwatch 1, would take 3 seconds to regenerate, and that generally felt pretty quick. So you're talking nearly double the health regeneration speed of shield health just by taking this while being a support. And I do think that's better than taking armor as a support, because as a support, you have a very low health bar. The first instance of damage you're probably going to take is probably going to be poke from an Ashe or a Cass, which is probably going to immediately break your armor in one hit, so you're probably not going to get the long-term value of it negating a whole lot of damage. You're not getting pocketed because you're a support, you're the person pocketing, not the person being pocketed. So that armor health isn't going to regenerate and be reused to get even more value, it's just going to be used once and then it's gone. And on top of that, you're going to be jumping in and out of fights pretty rapidly, especially in a fast-paced game mode like this. And so the faster you can regenerate your health in between, engagements, the more active you can be, the more uptime you can be, the more impact you can have. I just personally think that for support specifically, that increased health regen time is a little bit more important than just a little bit of extra damage mitigation. Now again, in fairness, I do think the armor pick is better for a tank or a DPS who is going to get pocket, like it's a mercy pocketed soldier or Ashe or something. But I just feel like if you're playing a tank, you don't really want 25 extra health when you already have a huge health bar a lot of the time, unless you're desperate. And if you're playing a DPS, it can be more useful to take extra health, but honestly, you get so much more value out of just increasing your weapon power that you usually just go all in on it. So I personally think that's the best of the three, but either way, they're neck and neck, they're all good items to get, they're all B tier. But before we move on to the rare items, it turns out there was one I missed in my initial recording, due to a bunch of unfortunate coincidences. You see, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but generally playing Stadium, every now and then items and powers are getting quietly pulled from the mode to be worked on behind the scenes and then quickly re-added back in. Presumably this is due to performance issues with certain abilities that they are fixing live and temporarily removing once they identify the problems and add them back in the second they're fixed. But because these are happening quite rapidly and quietly compared to your usual patch notes, there isn't really any word when this happens. Sometimes you just log in one day and one of the powers you were using just isn't an option anymore today, and you'll have to come back tomorrow when it's fixed and it's put back in. As much as this can be annoying, I don't really mind it so much because it shows just how hardworking they are in this mode and how much they believe in it, that they are doing these quiet extra fixes in the background while also still rapidly pushing hotfix patches before the mid-season even comes. All that aside, you can probably see where this is going. It just so happened that when I started making this video, Heartbeat Sensor, the item we're about to talk about, had been pulled from the survival items without a word. Now usually I would have noticed that an item was missing, especially considering there aren't many items in the common category for survival compared to the epic category. However, the main reason I wasn't sure whether something was missing or not was because of the fact that Heartbeat Sensor used to be a weapon item before Stadium had fully released. And I guess me being an idiot, I simply thought, oh, I guess it was a weapon item then, not a survival item, without actually bothering to check that it was actually there in the weapons menu, which it wasn't. It didn't help that I was trying to avoid this mistake by cross-referencing with a list of all Stadium items that had been made outside of the game. However, that list had also been made during the pre-release before it had officially released, so that list listed Heartbeat Sensor as a weapon item, not a survival item. So my apologies for all that. Either way, what's the item itself do? Well, it costs 1,500 and it does two things. It grants you a 5% move speed boost, and it grants you an ability very similar to Sombra's Opportunist passive, where you get to see enemies that are at 30% or less health through walls. Generally, this ability to see nearly dead enemies is typically considered very niche and not very impactful, although it certainly depends on the character. If your character is very good at chasing, has lots of mobility, and especially if they have range on top of mobility, they can actually be quite the demon with this passive. But the majority of characters, yeah, it doesn't make a big impact. So the real headline here is the 5% move speed boost. Now I'm not about to sit here and convince you that 5% is a big amount. It isn't, but I mean it's cheap. The real reason that this is significant though, despite the fact that I would agree 5% move speed is not a lot, is that when you look at the move speed boosts in Stadium, they are very scarce and very expensive if you're talking unconditional move speed. Most move speed buffs in Stadium that actually provide a decent boost at a decent price do so under specific conditions. There are very few items available to you in Stadium that just give you move speed, no strings attached. And sure, you might think it might not make much of a difference if it's only a 5% move speed buff. But here's the thing, say you are a character that is a bit of a demon up close. No one really wants to get in your face, they want to keep their distance. Then say you decided to take a move speed boost and they didn't, which is very likely again because there are not a lot of move speed boost options in Stadium. Most builds won't have a move speed boost included. Even if it's just a 5% boost, that means if you walk at them and they try to run away, you will eventually outrun them and kill them, as a hard fact. Now obviously this can be countered by using cooldowns, but even then, really think about that. If by taking just a 5% move speed boost, you can make people use their cooldowns whether they want to or not, just by walking at them, isn't that actually quite valuable? Again, you have to know what you're doing when you pick this item, you have to know that your character is going to be the kind of character that people are going to be scared to approach, or you have to know that you're going to be able to get some other kind of value out of this item. But if you do, simply having any amount of move speed more than the opponent, even just 5%, is a way for you to get free value basically for just existing and walking forward. Even if it's not a lot of value, it's value you're getting for a very cheap price in the shop, and for basically no cost in-game. If you're talking about resources like cooldowns or ultimates and things like that, you're forcing out enemy cooldowns while not having to use any of your cooldowns. You're literally just walking on them. I'm probably making it sound like Heartbeat Sensor is actually a really good item, but I'm mostly just explaining why, as underwhelming as it might seem, it can be better than it looks. I still don't consider it to be an amazing item, mostly just because even though in theory it provides you just a fundamental free neutral advantage on most characters, it would also probably demonstrate a little bit that I would be out of touch with the gameplay of a real game of Overwatch for me to not acknowledge that while this is a free advantage you get that gets more effective the longer the game progresses, Overwatch, and Stadium specifically, is such a fast-paced game mode that oftentimes if this reward is guaranteed but slow, it's not going to give you enough reward until it's already too late. For this reason, it goes in C tier. On the right characters, it's a pretty reliable pick, but obviously, no matter who you buy it with, it's probably not going to have a huge impact. That's kind of to be expected with an item this cheap, but even still, it does mean that I couldn't put it at a particularly high tier. With all that said, we have already been going quite a while just covering the first batch of common items. For that reason, I think it's best for me to split this into 3 separate parts. So thank you for watching the first one. I'll try to be as quick as possible to get the second part out, where I'll cover all the rare items. I'd also like to apologise that because we only covered the common items in this video, you didn't get to see as many wacky mechanics. But either way, hopefully the recent upgrade in editing quality is appreciated and can help compensate a little bit for that. Either way, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye. And remember to subscribe.